Happened to walk up today on a colony that is doing orientation flights. These are young bees. They must have had a very large hatch at about the same time. But these are young bees that are doing their first flights, and I just happened to come up on the hive while they're doing it. I see it all the time, but this one's larger than your average orientation flight phenomenon. So I just thought I would video it a little bit today and let you enjoy it. Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Brother Bee's Bees. Today we're going to be talking about bee orientation flights. I'm in front of a hive that you will see in this video is featured because of a large orientation flight that was taking place with a number of honeybees. Capaldi and Dyer, in a 1999 research article about orientation flights, described them as follows. An orientation flight at the nest entrance begins as a departing bee turns and hovers back and forth, turning in short arcs, apparently looking at the hive entrance. Then the bee increases the size of the arcs until, after a few seconds, she flies in circles while ascending to heights of 5 to 10 meters above the ground. This spiraling flight takes the bee out of the sight of human observers. She returns a few minutes later, always without nectar or pollen. If you want to do some research on orientation flights, there are a number of sources out there. There are a number of videos about it. I found an article. First of all, I found the Capaldi and Dyer article helpful, or their research. Also, there is an article on the Apiarist blog, as well as the bee culture site. I think it's beeculture.com. So there are a number of places you can go to learn about orientation flights. But for those who happen to join me from time to time looking at the lives of bees, I just thought I would talk about these orientation flights a little bit. Capaldi and Dyer found that the bees they studied, and let me emphasize that scientists can put transponders on bees, and they are able to track the flight patterns and activities of bees using these transponders. And so they're not only studying orientation by a visual process, but they are also doing it by using transponders to track their flight patterns. And so as you think about the orientation flights, the work by Capaldi and Dyer found that the bees they studied did their first orientation flight somewhere between 3 and 14 days after emerging out of the cell, with the mean being somewhere around 6 or 7 days. Now, it looks like most bees start foraging 2 to 3 weeks after birth, but what the research is showing us that a week or so after they're born, they will start having orientation flights, and the bees that these researchers studied would do their first, or would have anywhere from 1 to 18 orientation flights. So most of them did multiple orientation flights. And so early on, it's not so much just testing their flight ability and learning how to fly, but they're memorizing their home. They're memorizing the landscape, because you can think about, for example, if they're in a hive in a tree in the woods, how difficult it can be to get back to their colony, back to their hive. And so in these flights, they are starting in front of their hive and then expanding upward and outward, and they're learning and memorizing the landscape so that when they go out and forage for pollen, nectar, and propolis, they can find their way back to the home hive. And there is a difference between, sometimes you can look at the front of a hive and you'll see you can actually have orientation flights and foraging flights going on at the same time, and there's a very big difference between them. The foraging flights are much slower. They kind of meander as they travel upward and outward. The foraging flights, they're flying much faster. They're kind of making a beeline, if you will, to the foraging site and back, especially if they're going to a location that they've been to before. So faster, more direct, and the foraging flights, they're going to return with pollen, whereas when they're doing an orientation flight, they're not going to be bringing pollen back to the colony. Now also, if you move a hive, then bees will do reorientation flights, and they are just kind of learning the new landscape so that they can find their way back home. So they're fascinating to watch as they are learning both to fly and especially learning their way around. And it's just a reminder, nobody wants to get lost. You've got practice flights and work going on. It's all mixed together. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed looking at the